the Beyond Sleep Training podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing real tales of how people have managed sleep in their family outside of sleep training culture. Because sleep looks different with a baby in the house. And because every family is different, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to take. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is being recorded, the Kalkadoon people. I pay my respects to the elders of this nation and the many other nations our guests reside in from the past, present and emerging. We honour Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, water and seas, as well as their rich contributions to society, including the birthing and nurturing of children. And welcome back to the Beyond Sleep Training podcast. I'm your host, Carly Grubb, and today I have the wonderful Dionne Davis as our guest. And Dionne is a thought-provoking, strong and wise advocate and activist. Dionne is passionate about birth, breastfeeding and decolonising the parenting space. She is a Black American woman currently living in Australia with her family. And you've been a member of the Beyond Sleep Training Project for over 3 years now, I believe, Dionne.
Yeah, I think I was there at the beginning. Yeah, because I remember like as soon as I like read like your first post about it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm on it. I'm on it. And then when you started the group, I was like, yep, I'm there too. Because it just resonated with how I want to parent and how, like children are people, you know what I mean? So I think if we start on that premise, that they're fully human from birth, I think that'll go a long way in not just parenting, but in life and everything.
That's brilliant. And I'm glad we could actually be there when you were looking for some solidarity as well. How far through your parenting experience were you when you found us?
I think so. So wait, when did you start?
We were in
I think it 2000.
2017.
It was 2017. Yeah, exactly. So my son was born June 1st. So yeah, I think, either he was just like, depending on when it actually started, he was either a newborn or it was right before he was born. Um, yeah. So
Brilliant.
like, well, I always knew that, I wanted to bed share, but yeah, it was just so great of a resource and a community to be like, okay, I'm not alone in this.
Absolutely. And so before you had your son, did you have any, like you said, you wanted to bed share? Did you have like the
Hmm.
information you needed to be able to do that? Or like, did you feel a little bit
Yeah,
lost with that
actually,
at the beginning?
I was a little bit lost because I just knew that I wasn't buying a crib. I wasn't setting up a separate room as a nursery. Um and um I researched it. I found out about James McKenna. I found out about the Safe Sleep 7. And this was just my own, Googling. I didn't have, a midwife or anybody really leading me towards this information. I just sort of was like, okay, he's going to be right next to me. This is how we're supposed to sleep. We're mammals. So this is where I'm going from. And I just sort of found what I needed. And I was very intimidated, even with the information that I'd found. So I actually purchased a device. It's called a Snuggle Me Organic. It's kind of like a DocaTalk Tot or whatever else the other ones are, um, so that he could sleep in that and still be in the bed, and not I wouldn't have to worry about me rolling over on him or his father rolling over on him, until I was comfortable with doing like the little C, and I was really solid with that because I was, historically, and I know, pregnancy changes you and your hormones change you, so you don't sleep the way that you used to sleep. But I was a very heavy sleeper, and so I just wanted to err on the side of caution. And now I know they say all those devices you're not supposed to use them for unsupervised sleep and blah blah blah. But I mean, Snuggle Me Organic for was a lifesaver, and I think it's amazing. And what Mia has done with that product is incredible, and I think it's a great, you know method of easing your way into it. So with that one, they're not supposed to be in it. As soon as they can roll over, they're out. They're right in the bed or into whatever, or co-sleep or whatever you do, but they can't be in that anymore. And right, just like clockwork, at 4 months, he started rolling over. And by that point, I was already preparing myself for it. And so he just came into the bed, and like it was nothing. It was super easy, and he's still there almost 4 years later. But yeah, I was very intimidated, and I get why people are really scared of it. And then, just your natural inclination to be like, oh, and then, the social pressure, and having your pediatrician or your GP say, absolutely not, don't do it, you know what I mean? And the fear mongering that goes on, because it doesn't, bed sharing is counter to everything that we're taught about parenting. And because, the way we're taught to parent by our society is the capitalist way. It's the way that gets the kid out of the way so that the mother can go back to work, because that's what it's all about. You know what I mean? So we're taught to formula feed. We're taught to have them in a crib, have them separate, have them cry it out because you don't have time. You have to go to sleep yourself, and they'll figure it out. And they can self-soothe, and like they're on their own. And it's all about separation, because that's how they create worker bees. But
Absolutely.
I'm
And
I'm I'm not trying to hear that.
and so before you had your babe, you said you were already looking into these kind of concepts. What actually got you on that path? Like, were you always familiar with the idea of bed sharing in your family, or what led you to actually be curious about that in the first place?
Okay, so even when I was working in corporate finance, for a huge international investment bank, I would still, on evenings and weekends, I would still babysit for one of the managing directors, just because, I'm an only child. But like, and the first time I thought, I just was, like just a typical only child. I have my one other, pardon me, child who I was close to, was my first cousin, and that was it. And I was fine with it. And then one time, a former friend was supposed to babysit, and she had a conflict, and she's like, do you mind covering for me? And I'm like, I don't know what to do. She's like, oh no, you'll be fine, the kid will go to sleep, like it's easy. And I'll never forget this child. Her name was Sarah. She was an only child. She was 2. And so I went, and I was like, well, um you know my friend can't make it, is it okay? And then they're like, sure, no, whatever. And she had terrible separation anxiety. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how are y'all going to do this? The both of you, my friend, and because at least she knows her, and the parents, like that. I mean, they were determined to go on their date night. So, okay, here I'm left with the child, and the child screaming, and like she just wasn't trying to hear it. And, you know, Mary Poppins was born. Like, I had this inner nanny in me, and she was born that night. And I don't know what made me do it, but I started singing Sarah Smile by Hall and Oates to her, and she calmed down. And
Oh, that's
then we just
beautiful.
vibed until bedtime. Yeah, and we vibed until bedtime. And I actually ended up stealing that job from my friend, because then after that she didn't want to see my friend. And that's how I started babysitting. And from then on, it was like, forget about it. Like, I babysat all the time, and like, because I wasn't allowed to have real part-time jobs most of the time when I was a teenager. Like, one summer I was allowed to lifeguard, but my parents, my father in particular, were just sort of like, you're a kid, you don't have any responsibilities. You know what I mean? Like, in that sense, your responsibility is to go to school, and that's it. So like, I didn't have to pay for my car or pay for my insurance or anything like that, because they're like, we got that covered. And so, babysitting was great because I could earn money. And at the time it was good money, you know what I mean? And so I would just book myself out. And then when I went to college, I went to Barnard College in New York City, and they actually have the Barnard babysitting service, which is pretty famous. So from that point on, I signed up as soon as I got there, and immediately I got a gig with a family that I know to this day. And those kids are now they're about to be 34 next month. They were twins, you know, and I babysat for them every Saturday night my first year of college. And then that summer, I was a weekend nanny in the Hamptons. And yeah, you know, and I did that, you know, like I said, from 15 until early 30s. And a lot of these families I still am in contact with, you know, 20 to 30 years later. So, and I've always known that I wanted to be a parent, you know, so that for me happened, you know, and I remember that exact moment too, when I just sort of was like, this was what I was going to do. And when I finally, you know, met my husband and was ready, and we conceived Dillian, you know, by that point I knew what I wanted to do. So I'd say for bed sharing though, in particular, because I digressed a bit, I apologize. With that,
No, it was great.
I remember in like, say, I don't think I was babysitting anymore. But I just all of a sudden, I don't know what started it, but I was like breastfeeding. You know what I mean? Like something, I either read an article or saw something, and I was like, oh yeah, when I become a parent, I want to breastfeed. And then from that, you know, then I learned about, you know, more about routine infant circumcision, and I learned about bed sharing, and you know, so it's like I think the pathway for me was breastfeeding, and that's what made me look more into parenting practices. And then, you know, once, you know, and like the idea of a nursery always, like I like the aesthetics of it, but you know, it just didn't seem practical, and it just seemed counterintuitive because, like, you know, I've just spent 9 months, you know, you know, nurture creating this, you know, manufacturing this product. You know, like
Yes.
I'm not just gonna put it on the shelf, you know what I mean? Like I'm not just gonna put it
Yeah.
on the display floor. Like I want it, you know, I want it next to me. And it just made sense. And like it also, like I'm just, you know, like we're mammals, we're primates, and I'm like, what monkey do you know that its baby sleeps separately? You know what I mean? What name one other mammal that, you know, it's you know, like even like whales, and they're in water, you know, they're still cuddled up together, you know, like that's the way it's supposed to be.
It's absolutely the
Yeah,
truth. And
so
once you start thinking about it like that, it's hard to kind of
exactly.
refute or
You can't go
imagine.
back.
Like, yeah, it kind of makes a lot of the stuff start to seem a little bit nonsense. I was similar once I started
Mm-hmm.
exploring it that way
Mm-hmm.
as well. Yeah. Yeah. It's until you've put it into that kind of context though, it can seem just the way things are or the way things are meant to
Exactly.
be.
Exactly.
So you've, yeah, it's that
Exactly.
question.
Exactly.
Excellent. So when your babe came, what was sleep like for you guys? So you already knew you were going to share sleep and you were going to breastfeed, but
Mm-hmm.
what actually happened once he
Mm-hmm.
arrived? What was he
Okay.
like?
Yes. So I had a laparoscopic myomectomy in 2015 to remove uterine fibroids and a dermoid cyst, because you don't want to have either of those in your uterus. But B, prior to meeting my husband, I actually was going to become a parent on my own and did 3 rounds of intrauterine insemination with my reproductive endocrinologist back in Baltimore. So you know, I was already gung ho, and then a little bit after a year, a little bit less than a year later, I met my husband, and 6 months after I moved to Australia, we finally conceived. So when he was born, so because of the previous uterine surgery, I was ineligible to push. You know, I wasn't allowed. They told me at 20 weeks, like after they saw my surgical report for my previous surgery, they're like, nope, you're not pushing. You're going to have a cesarean. So they scheduled my cesarean for 38 plus 1. So that was June 1st. And, you know, he was born and it was fine. So in New South Wales, I went public, and I was at the Royal Hospital for Women in Randwick. And if you have a C-section, they let you stay for 5 nights. Now you can go home early if you want to, and then you'll have the midwife visit. And typically they only let if you stay that long, you have one midwife visit instead of two. Um, so I stayed the full 5 nights, and they actually had a breastfeeding clinic led by one of the midwives there. And I went there a couple of days because they like sort of have different things on different days. Like one day they show you how to bathe the baby, and another day, but like the breastfeeding clinic, I think they have just about every day, because some of the mothers obviously had vaginal deliveries, and they're like out the same day or the next day. So they want to make sure everybody has access. So came home, and like I said, I had to snuggle me organic. So my husband was intimidated by it, even with the snuggle me. So he's like, no. So since he was working, I gave him the bigger bed. I gave him our king size bed, and I was like, you know what? I'll sleep with Dionne in the second bedroom, and the queen with the snuggle me. Fine. And both mornings, so the first night we're home, wake up in the morning, he's at the foot of the bed. The next morning the same, and then after that I was like, look, fool, like obviously he's like, I miss you guys. I'm like, well, then get into
Oh,
bed. I'm like, here's what we'll do. Like, we'll push the bed against the wall. I'll have the snuggle me next to the wall. I'll sleep in the middle, and then you're on the other side, so that way there won't be any accidents. You don't even have to worry about a straight elbow. It's all good. Fine. So that worked, and that was how it was. Now I only recently, and I mean like in the past 3 or 4 years, realized this was because of my asthma. But I've had insomnia intermittently, but when I have it, it's really bad, and chronic, for going on, well, at this point, for like 20 years. And I've been treated for it, but like, never done a sleep study. But like, basically they're just sort of like, oh, and they give me one medication and then give me another medication. And my constitution is like a horse when it comes to anything that's supposed to put me down, or wake me up. Um, so any of those types of pharmaceuticals just don't work for me. So finally, and I mean, after like 5, 6, 7 years of trying to figure out what was the right cocktail. Like, I can literally take a Xanax and drink a bottle of wine and still be awake. Like,
oh
I'm
my
like a
goodness.
horse. And not that I've done that. Not that I've done that.
No.
It was only a split, and it was totally accidental, and it was on a plane. So, but
Oh, mate.
yeah, like I just have this really, yeah, no, I have a really weird constitution. Like, even in high school, like I try to stay awake to do project work. I could take any of the over the counter stuff, no-dos, whatever they have, and they just either make me sick or not work at all. Like, make me sick and not work, or not work. And so
Wow.
I just gave up, right? So finally, we found a cocktail, and like, I don't even tell people what I take if I really have to go to sleep, because like it scares even doctors. They're like, really? And I'm like, yes, really, it works. I'm responsible. Just write the script. Like, I wouldn't use it if I didn't need it. So I'm used to not sleeping. You know what I mean? Like, and for me, like, I have to be pushing 36 hours before it's dangerous.
Wow.
So when he would wake up, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, I just whip out the boob and feed him and go back to sleep. But he actually, from the very beginning, would sleep 5 to 6 hours straight at night. And he did that up until about his 4 month vaccinations. So I got better sleep than a lot of parents do during that period of the fourth trimester. Like, he in that regard, he was a champion. Now he didn't nap, and like, he was a huge cat napper, and he was a contact napper. So if I moved wrong and woke him up, that was it.
Game over.
We just gotta wait till the next. Yeah, exactly. We just gotta wait till to the next nap, and that gave me a lot of stress. But I just sort of was like, well, his body knows what he needs, and I mean, if he doesn't need any more sleep, he doesn't need any more sleep. So I just sort of like, and I was like, and hopefully his brain and his body will be okay in 10 years, and I'm not making. And I'm like, because like, the thing is, like, just like those medications can't make me sleep, I can't make him sleep. You know what I mean? So like, he'll sleep when he sleeps. So I just sort of had to be cool with that. I mean, the one thing that I didn't know, that, or it just didn't register for me, is that I should have pumped. Um, like I should have woken up myself during in the middle of the night to pump, you know, so that he didn't, miss that feed, even though he was asleep, and just saved it and gave it to him later. But it is what it is. I mean, our breastfeeding journey is still going, so like we're all right. But I was like, oh, I wish I would have, I wish it would have clicked for me that, even though he's sleeping, that I need to do that, but
Yeah,
yeah, like so
it's
like it was sleep for us hasn't been that bad. And I mean, he only just like, so he's about to be 4, and in the past say 9 months he started where he'll go to sleep and sleep 10. He'll sleep the whole night, and like, and I don't mean just sleep 5 hours. No, he'll sleep from whenever he went to bed until he wakes up in the morning, unless he's sick. So now we're cruising now.
yeah, and he got there in his own time. So when it comes to, like you said, he was a real catnapper and whatnot. How did you actually manage sleep during the day? Then what were your tactics?
My tactics were to optimize it, so if we were in a position, like, so if he fell asleep in the car, I stayed in the car. You know what I mean? I didn't try to, because he never transferred. He still doesn't transfer. And I mean, he could be dead asleep in, like, in a car or the plane or whatever, and he will not transfer. His father can do it. Like, I don't know what Dan has that I don't, but his father can actually manage it sometimes, not even all the time, but I absolutely cannot. So once I learned that, like I was the queen of sitting in the car and reading a book or playing on my phone, or watching a movie on my phone, because I was not going to mess up his nap, So, and I mean, actually both of us still do that. If we're in the car and he falls asleep, we'll sit in the car. Even though, just because, like, obviously he needed it. So I'm gonna give it to him, and yeah, so like, and if I got him, if he was in the wrap, because I tried to baby wear as much as I could. Of course, in hindsight, I wish I'd done more, but it is what it is. Like, you'll drive yourself mad, with what a should have when it comes to parenting. But I did it as much as I could.
Yeah.
And if he falls asleep in the wrap, he stays in the wrap. If he's in the pram, he stays in the pram. Then I just optimized the conditions. One thing that I did do, and I'm very glad that I did, is that with regards to noise, I didn't do anything. Like, we didn't do any sort of white noise, or I had an app, that I used a little bit, but I didn't want to condition him too much where he had to had so many sleep crutches where, if everything's not just perfect, he won't sleep at all. And I wanted to expose him, because I'm a city girl. Like, Baltimore's not that big, but I went to university in New York City, and I spent, up until recently, it was most of my adult life up there. Pardon me. Yeah. So I wanted him to, like, if a garbage truck goes by, or we mostly lived, with the exception of when we lived in Vaucluse, we've mostly lived in the flight path in Sydney, and the planes are pretty loud, and they start at 6 and they don't stop until after, till around 11, after 10 o'clock at night. So, and at one point we lived really close to the Glazeville Bridge, and you could hear, the buses breaking and the motorcycles and everything. So I always made sure that, I didn't modify the noise. And I made sure, the TV's on and all this other stuff, just so that he will become acclimated to that. So he can pretty much sleep, and, the phone can ring or somebody can knock on the door, the buzzer, and he'll still stay asleep. But yeah, so I just sort of copped it. And I mean, in the back of my head, I was really worried about the cat naps, but like I said, I can't make him sleep. So, I just have to, hope for the best. And just,
Absolutely. And did you find, like, as he got a bit older and he needed less naps in the day, did his naps lengthen, or did he remain a cat napper? Or, like, what did you notice there?
well, no, what happened is, now when he was really small and he was doing, say, 3 naps a day, that was when it was the most difficult. When he went to 2 naps a day, he would do a solid bit, like, so he'd do, Another way that I try to optimize it is make sure he have his first nap early. Because if he had his first nap early, he'd have two naps. If he waited too late, then it just mess everything up. So if he had his first nap before 10 or around 10, and then he had a second nap around say 2 or 3ish, they'd each be a solid like hour and a half, And now, even now, he still naps. Like on the days that he doesn't, that he goes to preschool, he doesn't. But like today, but all the other days, he'll still nap. So because I know that, if he doesn't have a nap, then he'll fall asleep by like 4 o'clock, and then then we're screwed. Well, we're not. It's not that bad because he sleeps with us, so he'll just go to bed at 10 o'clock. you know. But if like on the days that he's home with me or on weekends, I'll try to make sure he takes his nap, or he's in a good position to sleep from 11 to 12, like in that window. If he falls asleep there, then he won't sleep too late where it'll mess up him going to bed at a decent hour, so that he can clock a good 10 hours at least. But even now, he probably doesn't sleep as much as most kids. Like, on a good day, he'll get 12 hours, but as long as he gets at least 10 and a half, I'm happy.
Yeah, that sounds spot on for a lot of kids, I think, too. And it's amazing how much variation there is in between when kids finish napping. Yeah. Yep, definitely. Yeah. It's around that in the window of 10 to 12 hours is like I think it's actually 9 to 12 hours is the range of normal. And so if he's also having a daytime nap, it all accumulates into that 24 hours. So that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
It always fascinates me.
I'm just judging him by me.
Yeah.
I'm just judging him by me because I was like my dad when I was little. Like, I mean, my father's still like this, and he's 73. I wish, like, he can literally sleep 12 hours even now as an adult. And when I was a kid, I slept just like him. I would, like I could sleep till 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning or even noon if I had stayed up late, like when I was a little bit older. I just, you always assume your kid's going to be like you. So I was like, yeah, he's going to sleep like me. Yeah, nah.
Yeah, nah, that wasn't for us either. I'm definitely a sleepy person, and that was not the case, particularly with my first guy. It's like, no, he definitely takes after his dad.
It's so funny. Like it's like like sometimes it's like they sort of pick. Okay, I'm gonna take this from her. I'm gonna take that from him. I think I'm gonna take that one from the paternal grandmother. Like it's so funny, and you notice these little quirks and these little characteristics, and it's like, wait, you barely spend time with this person. Like, how have you? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like, even things like facial expressions and things like that, we found that like you can just see these resemblances crop up, and it's like, hey, you really look like your uncle right there. Like it's definitely
exactly. Yeah, that's wild.
Genetics, impressive stuff. Anyway, we're getting very close to the end of the episode. So I was wondering if you would be very happy to share a tip with our listeners that you wish you could share with the world, I guess.
So my tip would be trust yourself and trust your biology. And I mean, it's sort of the same thing. You know what I mean? We're programmed, like we know what to do. You know what I mean? And it's based upon survival. It's ingrained. And I think we all need to trust that little voice because it really won't go wrong, and it really won't do your child wrong if you trust that voice, because there's innate knowledge that we all possess. It's buried in most cases in our age, in our society, but it's there, and to dig and find it and listen to it.
I love that, and I do agree with you because sometimes it can be hard to know, like wade your way through it, the layers that can be piled in on top. But usually, if something's feeling wrong inside in your heart and in your gut, you're usually going to be right, aren't you?
Yep.
Just the way the way things
'Cause, I
are.
mean, like
But
before all of this modern stuff, you know, you didn't have anything else. You didn't have Google, you didn't have a phone, you didn't have a car, you didn't have, you know what I mean? So yeah, so we have to get back to that.
I think so. And it's also a matter of having some decent role models around you too, I think, like having other people to be able to normalize things like breastfeeding and bed sharing and the nurturing of children, actually being able to see it, and the value of it is a hugely important part of being able to shut out the other noise. Because that's the thing, isn't it? We're all just looking for some kind of connection and guidance with other parents around us. And if all we get is that other information, it's hard to know. It's hard to shut that off, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, you do need that validation, but I think that's another thing we need to do. We need to self-validate. You know what I mean? Like, we know
For sure.
Like, and just trust ourselves. Like yeah, we need the community, we need the village, but we need to be able to say, wait, I know I'm right. I know this is right. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, especially because it's kind of like, you know, as much as we might need those things, sometimes we still can't have them. And to still then be able to see ourselves as worthy and valuable for the work that we're putting in, you can give yourself that. You are able to give yourself that without anybody else doing it for you.
100%. I love that. Yep, exactly.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on, Dionne. And after all of our tech troubles and whatnot, I'm just so glad we got to hear your voice and your wisdom. And
thank you.
And for anyone who's listening along, Dionne is one of my favorite people to follow on Instagram. She always keeps the feed nice and mixed up. And so, is there anywhere else we can find you, Dionne?
I started a Patreon, but it's in its infancy.
How
I
exciting!
don't have anything
Awesome.
on there yet, but I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it on. I'm gonna get it going, and I'll put it in my bio on Instagram. I have a Facebook page, like a personal blog page, I guess, as they call it. But that's just basically my Instagram. So, you know, Instagram is really where most of it is. But soon I'm gonna start saving my really good stuff for the Patreon, and just sort of saying, you know, new post on the Patreon, and giving a teaser, and then you can go over to the Patreon and get the scoop.
That'd be brilliant. And once you actually have it up, just shoot me through the link and I'll add it to our show notes for this episode. So whenever people listen to the episode, they can find it in there. That'd be fantastic. So thank you so much for your time, though. You're an absolute gem.
Carly.
And we might look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Please do. Absolutely. Yes, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who listened along for today's episode. Thank you. Bye. I really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. The information we discussed was just that, information only. It is not specific advice. If you take any action following something you've heard from our show today, it is important to make sure you get professional advice about your unique situation before you proceed, whether that advice be legal, financial, accounting, medical, or any other advice. Please reach out to me if you do have any questions or if there's a topic you'd really like us to be covering. And if you know somebody who'd really benefit from listening to our podcast, please be sure to pass our name along. Also, check out our free peer support group, the Beyond Sleep Training Project, and our wonderful website, www.littlesparklers.org. If you'd like even more from the show, you can join us as a patron on Patreon, and you can find a link for that in our show notes. If listening is not really your jam, we also make sure we put full episode transcripts on our Little Sparklers website for you to also enjoy, and fully captioned YouTube videos as well on our Little Sparklers channel. So thanks again for listening today. We really enjoy bringing this